All right. Thank you everyone again so much for joining us. I'm Heather Walter. I am the OER librarian at UT Libraries. And it is my pleasure this year to host this year's virtual faculty showcase featuring Dr. Jocelly Miners and Dr. Anel Brandl. Dr. Anel Brandl is joining us from Florida State University. She is a teaching professor of Spanish and linguistics at Florida State University. Her work centers on Spanish heritage bilingualism, second language development, and pedagogical approaches that promote heritage language maintenance. She founded FSU's Spanish Heritage Program, where she designs courses that honor the linguistic strengths, identities, and needs of heritage speakers. She is also the founders of Voces Unidas, the multilingual initiative for farm worker and immigrant advocacy, which provides community-focused interpretation and translation services for low-income farm worker and immigrant populations. Her teaching and advocacy advance inclusive language education that values the resources heritage speakers bring to the classroom. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Brandl.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Jocelly Miners joins us from the University of Texas at Austin. She is an associate professor of instruction in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at UT Austin. She specializes in teaching and developing courses for Spanish heritage learners, Spanish for healthcare professionals, and courses implementing open pedagogy and experiential learning. She has created several OERs for the Heritage Spanish program at UT Austin and currently serves as co-director for the Texas Coalition for Heritage Spanish, where she collaborates with other Texas universities and works on promoting open pedagogies and the use of open educational resources to advance the field of heritage Spanish instruction. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Miners. Today, Dr. Brandl and Dr. Miners are showcasing their OER textbook, Estamos aquí. Estamos aquí is an OER designed for intermediate level learners of Spanish as a heritage language. Developed collaboratively by 5 SHL educators, the textbook responds to the need for openly accessible, culturally sustaining materials that reflect the linguistic realities, histories, and identities of U.S. Latina communities. Focusing on U.S. Spanish, Estamos aquí explores the histories, cultures, linguistic practices, and identities of Latina communities in all regions of the country. Integrating open pedagogy, multiliteracies, cultural language awareness, racial linguistics, community engagement, and service learning frameworks. The textbook offers strategies for active, reflective, and participatory learning. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce these two participants and to hear more about their project. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Brandl and Dr. Miners now to tell us all about their resource.
Hello, good morning. And first, thank you so much, Heather, for inviting us, first of all, and for this great introduction and it's fun to be able to get to share our project that we are excited about and we've been working for a while. And I'm really happy that my colleague Anel is here joining us today. And we have been, working on this project for a while now. We recently had a book launch webinar too, and we did all of that in Spanish. So we are glad today to showcase our book, but also mostly give you some ideas for what you can do in your own work, in your own languages that you teach. So of course, this talk will be in English, and though we are going to highlight our textbook, our goal is for everybody to take something that they can use in their own work. So we will get started. I think Anel is going to start with our introductions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jocelly. And let me openly thank Heather Walters. She's been wonderful in organizing this and inviting us. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So today, Jocelly and I want to talk to you about the open pedagogy principles that we use to create this collaborative text. So today we're going to talk to you a little bit about our motivation, the goals that we had, and we would like to highlight particularly these two frameworks that we use in our open access, that is localization and open pedagogies. And we are going to end with call to action and reflection. So this textbook is collaborative because we really wanted to represent all those bilingual communities and regional identities of the Hispanic population throughout the United States. So that was a pretty challenging objective. And we managed to come together, our friend Angelica Amezcua, who is in Washington, Flavia Belpoliti, that many of you probably already know, who is in East Texas and A&M, Stephanie Gonzalez, who is also in Texas, Jocelly and myself, who are in Florida. But this project originally started with about 15 collaborators. In our next slide, you are going to see how widespread this effort has been. Really has been a community effort. And as you can see, we had reviewers from all places of the United States. We also have other contributors. And I want to use this opportunity to thank Coral, because without the support of Coral, and particularly Rachel Click, we wouldn't be here today. So as you can see, this project has been really, truly collaborative. There's a lot of room for collaboration. So if you're in a part of the United States that is not represented here, please contact us, and we would love to talk about it. But continuing with the motivation of our textbook, we really needed to create a textbook that were openly accessible, culturally sustaining, and that could reflect the realities and histories of all these U.S. populations, U.S. communities that are minoritized and that had not really been represented in any textbook. Our goal was to, next slide, please. Our goal was to, the main goal that we have is to present our students with this critical and historical perspective of the role that our communities have played here in the United States, with the objective to increase the bilingual competence. And also we want them to recognize and appreciate what the Spanish language and the Latino Hispanic culture does for their ethno-linguistic identities. With these three goals in mind, we came together, all of us, and after many months of crafting, I can tell you that it took a while to understand what do we wanted to have in this textbook? What was the personality that we wanted this textbook to have? After many months, we came up with Estamos aquí, Comunidades, bilingües e identidades regionales de los Estados Unidos. This is our first volume. We are working on the second volume, and this is a digital, completely open educational resource that was created by the five of us. The target population, as Rachel mentioned, is Heritage Spanish learners, speakers at the intermediate level, but it's pretty adaptable. It can be very easily adapted. Again, we wanted to showcase all of these Hispano-Latino communities throughout the United States. And so we came up with an outline that is based on the regions of the United States. As you can see, Volume 1 has all of these regions, because we really wanted to make sure that we could represent the small Hispanic communities in all of these states. So volume now is available. Maybe we can share the link with our audience so they can access it. We're working on the second chapter. So again, if you're in one of those states, in these states in volume 2 that you see in the screen, if you would like to collaborate with us, please let us know. So the way our OER is organized is we have all of these sections. We introduce the region with a lot of demographic information. In Lengua Viva, is pretty much we're showcasing the regional language usage. In some sections, we're using just materials from that region, radio stations, community centers. It really, we try to represent these, these communities in terms of, what they have done in terms of education, economy, sociopolitics, the art, culture, their identity. And we also wanted to add a section on grammar, just so that our students have the opportunity to reflect on what they say, how they say it, and why they are saying it. That we want them to, in this section, we actually trying to make make them aware of the choices that they are making when it comes to their bilingualism. We want to give them agency to choose the forms that they are actually using, and be aware of why they're using what they're using. We're focusing on the Spanish of the United States. So you're going to find a lot of that in this textbook that is different from other textbooks. We really didn't go for the classic grammar approach to languages, but this is more a reflective approach to the Spanish of the United States. I want to be kind of very emphatic about that. And for that, we use two pedagogical frameworks. Well, actually, we use more. We use 5, but, the main pedagogical frameworks that we use for the activities on our textbook is localization and open pedagogies. We also have, multiliteracy, sociolinguistic and racial linguistic perspective. And another pillar of this textbook is all the community engagement tasks that we have there. But today, we're going to focus on localization and open pedagogies. If you're interested in reading about these pedagogical frameworks, you can access the preface of our textbook. You can scan this QR code, and it will take you directly to this preface where we go in depth into these pedagogical frameworks. We're going to give you a little overview here, just so you have an idea what you will find in our textbook. So the first framework is localization. And this is a framework that you can use not only for a textbook. This is a framework that you can use for any class. It doesn't have to be used for a language class. It's really a framework that is culturally really rich. So this framework localization started in marketing. Actually, it's a concept from marketing, and PIM 2005 defined it as making a product linguistically and culturally appropriate for a specific country, region, or language. This adaptation involves like cultural adaptations of whatever is it that you're producing, but always taking into account the local worldview, the local beliefs, customs, and practices. And the goal is here to just make anything like the product that you're making relevant to that local community, so that they feel ownership of these of this product, and they can connect at a deeper level with this product. So in heritage language learning, localization is actually essential, because there's a strong connection between the heritage culture, language, and the local communities, right? Is in these communities that the minority language really lives and exists. And so this is a key side for the maintenance of these heritage languages and their identity. So that's the reason why we decided to use localization as a core design principle of this textbook. And so what it meant for us was that we had to adapt all of these pedagogical materials with a focus on the local communities, the regional identities, what are the students' linguistic realities, and also we had to take into account what are the institutional goals. But something that I want to be very emphatic is that all of these local cultural engagement really strengthens students' belonging and cultural understanding, their own cultural understanding. And truly, it supports their heritage, language, and cultural maintenance. It deepens their motivation and their identity development. So we encourage everybody to think about localization and how that how that can inform your courses. So there's many advantages of adapting this community connected pedagogy. And what does this mean, right? What does it mean to adapt a community connected pedagogy? Is really listening or involving community elders, cultural practitioners, local institutions. And once you do that, you'll see that your learners have these stronger heritage language skills and cultural knowledge. So we invite everybody to adapt, to adapt localization so that you can have a language program that is very effective when it comes to identity and identity maintenance and language maintenance. So how can instructors implement, localization in their courses? And that's something that my colleague Jocelly Miners is going to present.
Thank you, Anel. So I'm going to give you some practical ideas of how we can implement localization in our classes. And so, first of all, thinking about our curriculum and content, here's just a few bullet points with ideas of what we can do. We can always include local demographic data or maps about our local communities, and also use regional media as a source of information. We can substitute examples in whatever materials we're using with local public signage, businesses, institutions, things that students can relate to or that they have actually seen in their day-to-day life. We can incorporate local historical events, migration stories, and just anything that we are studying or researching or learning about, we can relate it to our own local areas, communities, and realities so that students can really identify with what you're learning. In terms of the local language and linguistic practices, we always encourage highlighting the local language varieties or contact features. So this is something we do in our section that's called Lengua Viva in each chapter. We really look at how language is actually used by the people who live in those areas and where the linguistic influences come from, the languages and varieties that are in contact and what is getting produced and what is really the way that people speak. And this is really how our students speak, so it really can connect with the students as well. We have ideas like collecting community vocabulary lists from students and their families, and then comparing textbook examples with local speech patterns. So whatever's in your textbook, just compare it to what people actually say or how they speak. And then analyzing real local discourse that can be oral, but also announcements, flyers, bulletins, etc. Then we can stretch this to community partnerships, just engaging with the community. Localization can also include that. So, for example, inviting guest speakers, people who are important in the community, partnering with community centers, NGOs, clinics, schools, organize events where the students can do field-based observation tasks in the local community, and even build projects around existing community campus or community initiatives. And really, like it says campus, it doesn't have to be outside, really. It can just be engaging with your local community on your local campus. In terms of student-centered localization, some ideas are letting students choose a local community issue for their project. So something that they really can get to know well because it's in their own community. And they can do things like create mini ethnographies of their neighborhoods. They can collect family or community oral histories, or create linguistic landscape reports where they can actually go out and talk to people and take pictures of their local community. And of course, using their feedback to adjust topic spacing and just giving them support in whatever they want to learn, right? Supporting what they want to learn. So now, in terms of our more local classroom practices, we have some suggestions such as replacing generic assignments with local research, right? Things that they can actually go and see for themselves, or storytelling projects. We can create public-facing outputs, such as websites, brochures, etc., that we can use for local audiences that would be relevant in our communities, develop class archives, and even share our projects with community partners or campus events. And all of these practices that are listed here go hand in hand with our framework of open pedagogy, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. But first of all, before moving on to open pedagogy, I wanted to just highlight one example of localization in our own textbook in Estamos aquí. So as we mentioned, we have all the regions of the United States represented. And so the students are learning about the demographics, about the language, the people, the practices, culture, identity, the economy, all these aspects from that particular region. And so our goal is that wherever you are in the United States, your students will feel represented in at least a small way. If it's not their town or their city, but at least their state is represented and the cultures of that state, the Hispanic cultures. And so an example from chapter 1 is we have Washington, D.C. as one of the cities that we're researching. And we have some activities about nonprofit organizations in Washington, D.C. And here to the left, you can see some information about that and researching about what type of work these organizations do. But then there's always a next step. And the next step is connected to your own local reality. So what organizations do you know in your own city or your region or your campus, and what are they doing, and how can you get involved, right? And then on the right, we have another reading about Washington, D.C., but this is about gentrification. And so they learn about what is happening in that city and how it's affecting people in different ways. They watch a video about it. But then, like I said, there's always a next step. And then when you talk in your groups, at the bottom it says, have you seen this happen in your own city or community? What do you think about it? And then we go into how is it affecting the Hispanic population in your own communities, and what can we do about it, right? So it's not doesn't have to be something huge, but it's really just everywhere you look, just connect what you're doing to your own community, and that really makes students engage much more with the materials. Okay, so moving on, our next framework that we want to highlight today is open pedagogy, and of course it's Open Education Week, so that is why we want to talk about open education today. And so we all know what open educational resources are, right? So people have been creating and sharing open educational resources for some years now, but the idea of open education is not just OER, but it's about something we call open educational practices. So it's many other things that go along with the resources. And so I'd like to start this section with a quote from Blythe and Toms that says that the democratization of knowledge, both the creation and distribution of it, lies at the heart of open education movement. So this idea of democratization is, it's education for all, right? And so I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about what open pedagogy is. And in a nutshell, it's basically the practice of engaging with students as creators of information rather than simply consumers of it. So students don't always only have to consume information, but they can produce it as well. And so this is a form of experiential learning where students can demonstrate their understanding through the act of creation. And this, of course, aligns really well with project-based learning, which is a framework that we've been using also for many years now. And so basically, students in their classes create materials. And these products that they create can be openly licensed with, for example, a Creative Commons license, and they could live outside the classroom in a way that can have some kind of impact on the greater community, whether that be your school, your university, your campus, your town, your city, or beyond, right? And so this framework emphasizes openness, collaboration, and student agency, and it creates a more inclusive and effective educational environment because we can be creating content with our students, and we do this by engaging them in what we call renewable assignments instead of disposable ones. Now, disposable assignments are your more traditional assignment that you do for a class. You write a paper or you do a project. The professor instructor grades it, they return it, and that's it. It goes in the recycling bin. Now, a renewable assignment would be a project that once the student gets feedback on their project, it can be used for another purpose, right? It can go outside the classroom for a larger audience. And we have here just this graphic with some of the results that have been found from implementing pedagogy practices. So it really empowers the learners to become agents of knowledge production and thus shifts the teacher role from sage to facilitator. So we're helping students learn by producing, right? And it promotes collaboration. It balances the power of knowledge, access, and control. And of course, like I said earlier, it advances the democratization of knowledge and equitable educational access. So now in terms of Spanish as a heritage language, which is the focus of our textbook and our work, we know that empowerment is at the center of heritage language education. And through this framework, we can really empower our students to be experts and producers of linguistic and cultural knowledge. And we know those of us who have taught Spanish as a heritage language that students come into our classrooms with already like a lot of knowledge of their language and their culture. And so when we share, we have motivate them to share their work with the community. This highlights the value of their experiences, and then at the same time, they're disseminating their cultural and linguistic heritage. We also know that many of our students wish to serve or to get involved in their communities in some way whenever we talk to students about why they want to improve their Spanish or why they're studying what they're studying, they want to give back in some way, right? So they are eager to engage. And so we want to facilitate this engagement with the community, but also creating a community of learners throughout the country who can share their different but relatable perspectives and experiences. It's really great for them to be able to know that, for example, our textbook is being used all over the country, and that people, as you know, in the same way that we are learning about Washington, D.C., in the example I showed you, students in Washington, D.C. are learning about Texas and our communities. And so through some of our projects that we have in our textbook, we would like to create this kind of network where students can share and exchange information from different parts of the country. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. But I have one example of a renewable project through an open pedagogy project I've been doing for a few years now with one of my students, and it's called Heritage Spanish Community Projects and Lesson Plans, where in one of my classes, the students have these big projects that they do. And, I'm going to give you the example of the middle one. La Leyenda is one where they interview somebody from their community who can tell them an a story, a folk story that's usually an oral practice, and it goes down from generation to generation. Your grandparents told you this story, and so they interview somebody and they tell them a story, and then they have to write it, and we do a lot of editing, and just it's a way for them to be creating something, but they're improving their language as well. And then once the stories are done and edited and formatted in a creative way, they are published as open resources with a Creative Commons license, and they're accompanied by lesson plans that other teachers and instructors at all different levels can use with their students for teaching anything, vocabulary, grammar, etc. And so for our university students, when they know that their project is going to be shared online as an open product, and other teachers and other students are going to be reading their stories and using them to learn, it really feels like they are giving back and that their knowledge and their family stories and traditions actually have value outside of their home. So this is just one example, and if you want to take a look more, I have there the QR code where you can find all of these projects and use them if you wish. So in our own textbook, in Estamos aquí, I wanted just to highlight a couple of examples of open pedagogy. A lot of the activities we have are just step by step, step one, step two, step three. And a lot of these at the end, there's like the final step in la comunidad. So that is where we can uh, ask people to think about sharing their work with the community. So, for example, there is in our initial chapter, there's a section about art and identity, and the students have to create a playlist that showcases their identity, their culture, their life. It's songs that have meaning for them, and they have to write about it and think about why certain songs evoke memories or take them back to their childhood, etc., and why they're important. And then we have them create a playlist on one of these platforms like Spotify. And in the textbook, we say, well, once you have this project done, why don't you share it? So you can share it with your class, of course, but you can also share it with us and we can put it on our website. And it can be a project that students in other parts of the country can appreciate and see and probably realize that you will have a lot of it in common. Your playlist with the students, maybe Anel's in Florida or my other colleague in Washington, if we all share what our students are doing, it's a way for them to connect and just enjoy everybody's work and create the sense of community. Then I'm going to give you another example, and this one includes one of our other frameworks, which is service learning and community engagement. And this is a project where we encourage students to go and support some organizations that are farm workers related, for example. And this, this is an example because depending on where you are, you might find a different organization that supports some other type of mission that you want to engage in. But we take them step by step in how to research and contact an organization, create a certain type of materials that the organization would find useful for their mission. And then, how to present it. We have reflection for all the different steps. We have rubrics for some of these projects. And it's just a way to have them look around them in their own communities and see what are the needs, who can I partner with, and how can I use my linguistic skills or what I'm learning in my class to support the work that people are doing in my community. And so finally, we wanted to have some time for reflection and give you somewhat call to action about how to take the next steps. And so I want to end by sharing these questions where you can reflect about your own work and what you can do to perhaps include some of these ideas that we talked about today. For example, where could I share my students' work or who could we partner with in my community? What adjustments could I make or what next step could I take with work that I'm already doing with my students? So you don't have to do something really different, but something you're already doing. You could just think about that next step. Could I change one of my assignments from disposable to renewable? And if so, what purpose could it serve? And then finally, how could I implement some aspects of localization, open pedagogy, or community engagement with my classes? And this, of course, takes doing some work of researching and exploring what the needs are of our community, because that is the main point. We need to find what the community needs and where we could contribute, because we can't just come up ourselves and make up what we think people need, but we really need to engage with the community and see where we could contribute in some way with our own work and our students' work. So I'll leave you with these questions to think about. And here is the website and the QR code for our textbook. And we have time for you to share some of your ideas of how you think you could use this work, or for you to ask any questions you may have about our work or our book or anything. So thank you for listening, and we are looking forward to hearing from you and answering any questions.
Thank you so much, Jocelly. That is an incredible resource, and I'm so proud of you both for putting it together. And I know the students love it, and just involving them in this process is so important and exactly the spirit of open. As Jocelly said, we have time for questions. You can call out if you want. If you prefer to put them in the chat, I'm happy to read them out. But take advantage of this moment to ask these two wonderful professors about their resource and their process. Okay, there's a question in the chat. How do you treat grammatical differences among speakers? And they have an example, and the Jocelly and now if you the example is in the chat, let me know if you can't see it. I don't think it's very
Yeah.
helpful for me to read it aloud.
Just, you want me, Jocelyn, to answer this question? Yeah, so we try to avoid this deficit framing, approach to languages. So kind of saying, oh, this is an error. Um, we stay away from this deficit perspective, and we kind of have adopted an asset perspective to languages. So in this case, instead of saying, oh, this is an error, we just try to make them kind of think about it and be aware of why is it that they are using this particular structure. So when we connect these to what they do in English and we talk about language dominance, like, okay, so bilingualism is not black and white, right? Bilingualism is a spectrum. And so depending on where you are in the spectrum, you can be Spanish dominant or English dominant. And depending on your dominance, right, you are going to do this kind of emulation of English syntax, more or less, right? But once we make them aware that, oh, you're doing this because you're building two languages, and because this is, an advantage, you just have to be aware that Spanish doesn't have preposition stranding, right? It's not one of the features of language, of Spanish, preposition stranding. So kind of there's ways of framing this. So in the book, we try to have these little kind of like reflective capsules or reflective approaches to just thinking, why is it that I'm doing yo jugaba con, right? Like it's just a moment to reflect. And once that they can see kind of this as related to their English dominance, they really are more aware of the process. They can self monitor their speech. So what we want them to do is just be so reflective that they can self monitor themselves and understand that, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just normal bilingual behavior. It's normal multilingual behavior, what I'm just doing here. So we remove the shame, right? Like that we know shaming is it's just very prominent in Hispanics speaking Spanish in the US. This shaming not only comes from their family, not only comes from school, it comes from everywhere, right? It's a lot. So what we tried to do in the book, we're moving completely away from a deficit approach into an asset approach of things. And this asset approach, just any manifestation of having a bilingual brain is an advantage, right? So we try to frame it that way. Excellent question, Todd. Thank you so much for the question.
That was a wonderful answer too. I love hearing the asset mindset versus a deficit mindset and avoiding the shame. I feel like that goes a long way with your students to build the trust and the welcoming into the language rather than the emphasis on perfection.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I think removing the shaming in the speaking is kind of one of the just main tenets of having heritage language tracks or programs or resources. That's kind of the objective.
Wonderful. There is another question in the chat. This one says, thank you so much for doing this valuable work. I only wonder if you have built-in ways to change or modify your curriculum as sorry, a little bar, as the values and cultural aspects of heritage language speakers change as the years go by, or how can you make the learners aware of these changes?
Hi, Dale. Thank you for coming and thank you for the question. Yes, and I think that's one of the great advantages of open resources is that they are so flexible and adaptable, and I don't know if this is the word updatable, but really we can update as we go. And so that's one of the the idea is that we can keep modifying and changing things out as needed. And so, for example, I'll give you a clear example of a section we wrote regarding the election, the last election, and we wrote the section before the election actually happened. And so we had some questions about who do you think is going to win and what do you think is it going to affect the community? And then once the election occurred, then we realized, oh, now we need to go back and tweak this a little bit and change the reflection questions and maybe add a follow-up activity where we talk about what is going on now. So how instead of how do you think this is going to affect, so what is going on in the country, how is it affecting our population? And so we have a plan to once a year update our materials and include more relevant readings or more, things that are happening, current events, etc. And that's one answer to your question, but also we believe that open educational resources are meant for instructors to do as they wish with them. And so to adapt them to their own needs and their own realities of whatever's going on in their local communities with their students. And the needs of each heritage language population are also different. Like the students who, are learning Spanish as a heritage language in Miami, Florida, is going to be a very different population compared to the ones, some maybe like in the Midwest, right? And so each instructor has to also be able to keep their materials current. And so we expect to be doing that, but I also think that that's the beauty of OER is that instructors can be adjusting and adapting their materials to their needs. So I hope that answers your question, Dale. Gracias.
That's an excellent answer, Jocelyn. And you're right. That's one of the top reasons we love OER is the adaptability and the differentiation. As you pointed out, one group of students may not benefit from the same static textbook as another group of students, but with OER, you can tailor that to their specific needs. All right. Are there any other questions? I see something just popped up in the chat.
Well, I didn't have a question, but I wanted to congratulate Anel, Jocelly, and Heather, to you as well, because you organized the meeting today or the seminar. I think, yeah, the material is fresh, it's adaptable, the localization aspect, the open pedagogy part are very interesting, and I take students abroad. I take a group of, say, 20 students. You may have 12 heritage speakers and 8 students who are non-heritage. And we bring students to work with industries for credit. They don't get paid, but it's interesting that we can use some of the readings and even the lesson, for example, on the diacritic accent, distinguishing between el with accent or el with an accent, tu, the same thing with and without the tilde. And when students go abroad to work with an industry, they can actually prepare ahead of time. So, it can be expanded to non-heritage speakers who are part of the same class going abroad for work. A little bit of the experiential learning that both authors were talking about. So thank you. Thank you so much. I saw your talk today and I was able to get in, because it was lunchtime. So I appreciate all the work and that we have it there available to use it, and adapt as, we go on.
Thank you, Estrella. Estrella is, she's in Florida. We're neighbors in neighboring universities. So I was glad to see somebody from Florida. Any questions you have about the textbook, please let us know. And I think there's another question in the chat from Jose.
Yes, Jose says, first, I want to congratulate you both for this great resource, which we all echo that. Congratulations. My question is about the step before students come into your classroom. How do you and your collaborators identify Spanish heritage learners? More specifically, do you all have a standard level of proficiency that places students in the beginning versus intermediate?
Do you want me to answer, Anel? So
I can answer too. Like maybe we can give both perspectives.
the thing is, it's very different from one program to another. So yes, we each would have our own perspective because I think every heritage program does it a little bit different. In my own university, we have an open enrollment policy for the first level of Heritage Spanish. And it's an accelerated course. It's a 6-hour course. It's pretty intensive. And students can self-select to enter. And so unless they have the equivalent from either an AP class or IB or a placement test, if they're a heritage speaker, then they just automatically can take that class. And it's a sort of leveling class where we have a lot of variety of proficiency levels of students. Some heritage speakers come into that class and they're very fluent. Some are just receptive bilinguals, so they can understand us, but they have never had much need to use the language, but they understand it. And so that is a tough class, but it's a 6-hour class, so we have plenty of time to kind of level the students out and give them a solid foundation so that then they can move to the intermediate level together. But one of the great things about an adaptable resource like our textbook is that it's very modular and we can decide what sections to do depending on the level of our students and their needs. And so we can also have a lot of project-based activities where you can kind of tailor it to the needs and the level of each student. And it doesn't all have to be exactly the same for all students in your class. So that's my version. I think Anel can also answer.
Yeah, so in FSU, we have the two programs, the ELTA program and the Heritage program, and students are heritage speakers are in this faster track, right? Like, so we have a language requirement. So L2 learners have to take 3 levels of Spanish. Heritage speakers can only take 1. You know, they fulfill the language requirement with 1. And so it's very easy for us to recruit to make this change. They don't find it, they actually find a lot of advantages to not having to pay for 3 different classes and just move to one class. It's an accelerated class. Is that class counts as the first 3 credits for a Spanish minor. So it is pretty attractive. So we don't have like a hard time kind of recruiting students. And once people signals that they want to join, they have to have a one-on-one interview with the faculty. Here is very time consuming. I do have to say it does take a lot of time to do these, interviews. And we do have a placement test, but I think the best tool that we have so far is one-on-one interviews, just making sure just to check where if the students are going to heritage speakers 1 or 2, because we have 2 levels. So far it's not very efficient, but it does allow us to start creating a connection with the students. So when I see them in my class, I already met them, I already know part of the story. So it does have its pros and cons, I would say. More pros than cons. So one-on-one
Yeah,
interview.
and I've heard other programs who do the one-on-one. There's different ways of doing it. Like our university, for example, the program is too large, and we would not be able to
Yeah.
have one-on-one conversations with each student. But it does seems like that would be a great way for a small program.
Right. Thank you, Jose.
Yes, thank you. If there are any other questions, we may have time for 1 or 2 more. This is a really great conversation after the excellent presentation and then even better conversation afterwards. So thank you all so much for your questions.
Thank you. And we invite everybody to really just check out the resource. And like we said before, if you are in a state that we don't have collaborators, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. We are always looking for pictures of those regions and materials that we can use from the region where you are. And so, yeah. This is, at the end of the day, this is a community project that we're trying to just build. Everybody just trying to collaborate. So send us your comments.
Well, thank everyone again so much for joining us today. This was such a wonderful session. I really enjoyed hearing about this resource and again, the conversation afterward. As I mentioned, this presentation is recorded, and so I will be sending the recording out to everyone who registered for it. Otherwise, thank you all for attending, and thank you to our wonderful presenters for sharing this resource and creating this resource. Anel, you talked about how much time it takes to interview students, but creating resources like this takes a lot of time and collaboration as well. As Jocelly, I know you know that too. So thank you so much for your contribution to the field of open educational resources as a whole, and all the students who, whether you realize it or not, are using and engaging and learning from this resource.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you all.